Some people argue you can borrow even 100%. Yes, but it will depend on your economy. Because someone will say, look, the US has GDP of so much, but their loan portfolio is 100%. Then can you compare then Kenya's economy and the US economy? And of course, the risk factor.
The growth of the commercial component in Kenya's debt portfolio was too rapid within a very short time frame. And then we have had cases where some of these resources may have been misappropriated.
Lakini kama pesa zingekopwa na zitumike katika miradi ambayo ilikuwa imelengwa, labda hatungekuwa na hii shida yote, tungekuwa tumelipa madeni mengine. Shida ni kwamba kuna pesa zilikopwa, zikapotea, tunalipa, hatuoni matokeo.
Those are the views of some Kenyans this evening, and against that backdrop, let me also add the deadly COVID-19 pandemic, a struggling economy weighed down by debt and acrimonious politics rife with divisions. Our guest this evening, Dr. Mukhisa Kituyi, says he still wants to be the president of this country. Dr. Kituyi, fresh from the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, UNCTAD, in Geneva, is one of only 4 people so far who have publicly declared their intention to run for the presidency in next year's election. The election still months away, but the landscape is brimming with challenges that range from health to governance and cohesion to national security. And as such, it's not too early to pose this question: who will fit the bill? Tonight on the program, we take Dr. Kituyi to task on his quest for the presidency of the Republic of Kenya. And he's here in studio with me this evening. Dr. Kituyi, thanks so much again for being here with us. And I immediately want to pick up where we left off. We had a bit of a chat maybe 30 minutes ago or so. Siasa za Kenya have tweeted saying, we want to tell Dr. Kituyi this. It's not that Kenyans are saying they don't need, or the country doesn't need the IMF loan. They are saying that they are worried that these loans get squandered. What's your response to that? That it's not that Kenyans are saying Kenya doesn't need loans. Practically every country needs loans to develop, to survive in the times that we live in. But where do those loans go to? How do you respond to Siasa za Kenya tonight?
As I mentioned earlier on, I can appreciate the concern that is expressed by this community of citizens, that we have not been very prudent in our appetite for debt, and particularly in what we use the debt for. A number of things are very important. First of all, we can appreciate that the next generation has anxiety, declining employment possibilities, limited expansion of the modern sector jobs, fizzling out of smaller enterprises, and yet we're passing them a larger debt. How will they sustain the servicing of that debt? But having said that, there are 2 different things that are important to say. So long as you have a structure where there's such a massive disproportion between recurrent expenditure and capital expenditure, you are driving yourself into a situation where you cannot sustain the necessary investment in productive capacity. Too much of the money going into salaries and recurrent expenditures that do not create new wealth is a dead end for a country at our stage of development. We've seen the comparisons between Kenya and its neighbors in this phenomenon. Secondly, I appreciate that it's important that you have to procure certain credits. We rushed, and I agreed with Musalia Mudavadi about this. We have rather been too willing to go to the commercial markets for the commercial debt, which is much more rigid, it's more costly, and the ability to negotiate rescheduling is very, very difficult, if at all possible. So that's one level. The other is when government borrows so much that it sucks out credit, business is starved of the necessary oil that an enterprise requires. And therefore, government should create conditions where enterprise is the main procurer of credit for investment to grow the economy, and not government even domestically competing with enterprise in borrowing money. But most importantly, I listened to that explanation about some countries borrowing up to 100% of GDP.
Even up to 200%.
But you should understand, countries with convertible currencies like the US have the leeway, have the luxury of what they can call quantitative easing, which is basically print money and utilize it. The American government can print dollars and they become currency. Kenya cannot do the same. We do not have special drawing rights at IMF which allow us to print paper money and finance a deficit. If you did that, the Kenya shilling will go through the floor. So you have to differentiate between those countries with special drawing rights at IMF, with convertible currencies like the US, and countries like Kenya, where our currency has to reflect a basket of realities that do not have us the freedom of quantitative easing, for example.
It seems this evening you hold a contrary opinion from His Excellency the President. You had that soundbite from 2018 where he compared Kenya and said where we are in terms of our borrowing cannot be compared to Japan, for example, and he believed there was still further room for Kenya to borrow.
I don't want to dispute, I didn't listen to the conversation the President had at the time, but I will say this: our ability to service our debt is nothing to compare with industrialized countries with convertible currencies, but also our institutional capacity to raise the resources to ease the burden of debt service is not comparable to the others. I think it is a challenge that we cannot bequeath the next generation of Kenyans debt that has not demonstrably created more wealth and opportunities for them.
This may sound like an unrealistic question, but I'm still going to ask it. Should there be consequences for governments, past, present, future, that borrow and, whether through acts of omission or commission, put Kenyans in a situation where further time will be spent raising money to go into taxes to repay loans? Should there be consequences? Or do we just surrender and say it is what it is?
I think the rituals of control and regulation have become rituals. What do I mean? The ability of Parliament to raise the ceiling of debt procured by government should be tightened. As far as I'm concerned, it should even be a constitutional matter to give it the gravity that it deserves. This making a ceiling a mobile target, that government can come any day and ask Parliament to increase the ceiling, and we borrow more and we borrow more without asking questions. 10 years ago, the total public debt was about 1 trillion shillings. Today, our annual service of external debt is 1 trillion shillings. We have to worry about that. And we should say, collectively, we must find a way of justifying leadership without forever going to the credit markets to get more money we cannot afford and we're not being able to produce to equal the debt we're borrowing.
Which then makes me wonder this, Dr. Kituyi. In your view, what is the state of the Kenyan economy today? Because when you look out there, and let me give you what I mean by this, there are two perspectives. There's a rosy picture usually painted by those who are in support of government. They talk about our large mega projects, Kenya standing on the international market, ease of doing business, and they say Kenya is in good standing. But on the other side, there are critics, some of them who say that we're in a state of near default. What's the real picture of Kenya today, Dr.
I think the Monetary Policy Committee is better suited to give the real picture of Kenya today.
But I'm sure you have an opinion, Dr. Kituyi.
My sense is that it's a mixed bag. Kenyan enterprise has been very, very, very resilient. Against all odds, against very difficult circumstances, we're seeing business picking up even in the middle of the pandemic, and even with the partial decline of the lockdown. Of the pandemic in the middle of the past 1 year. So that has to be appreciated. We have also to appreciate the hardworking Kenyans. In spite of the virtual collapse of the hospitality industry, the massive decline of tourism, the massive decline of transport as a sector, and attended supplier networks, in spite of the disruptions of small and medium enterprises that make components for larger manufacturers, we have seen the ingenuity of Kenyans finding value and creatively struggling to put food on the table. But we have to be also very, very sure of one thing. The nation is hurting. There are too many people who are not being able to put a solid meal on the table. There are many people with uncertainty about what will happen with their children. There are too many people who cannot see hope of how they will service the higher education loan board obligations in the absence of any gainful employment on the horizon. We are dealing with this. We cannot talk about rosy pictures that the economy is turning around again at a time, as we are in right now, when virtually everybody I know has a relative with a high bill that is rising in a hospital because of COVID-related complications. And these are the realities of our country. We are hurting. We are vulnerable. enterprises seeing foreign investors decoupling. I've seen some major partner from America in agro-manufacturing in this country turn their back on Kenya and say conditions here are not, for the medium term, are not good for us. So we have to embrace the reality that we are struggling before we see what are the sectors which will be the drivers of a national recovery.
Dr. Kituyi, you clearly have, some would say, an accurate picture of the state of the nation. But I then would like to hear from you on what you propose as solutions. 2 months ago, around about early February, you told Kenyans that you want to be their next CEO. How would you handle the current state we find ourselves in, picking up from a government that's operated on a heavy appetite for loans and foreign funding? What would you do differently?
All right. Right now, the biggest challenge in town is COVID. And I think we have to play.
Constitutional amendments.
No. The biggest challenge in town is COVID pandemic. We have to secure as much as possible sufficient vials of the vaccines for us to be able to cover a significant proportion of the public, particularly vulnerable section of our population. Secondly, the economic vulnerabilities occasioned by the second lockdown. You know, a year ago, there was a 25% reduction in direct pay. There was a waiver on corporation taxes. There was helicopter money for the most vulnerable in our society. These were measures that were mitigating a lockdown, a partial lockdown at the time. Fast forward to 2021. We have a more severe lockdown than we had March last year. We have lifted the mitigating considerations that were put in place last year. And if you look at the Monetary Policy Committee's report from last week, they actually acknowledge that those measures helped. The measures that were put in place last year, which unfortunately have had to be lifted at the start of this year, helped. Now we're in the middle of a more acute lockdown. Those mitigating measures have not been reintroduced, but we have introduced VAT on petroleum. That means we have not only lifted the waivers that I had earlier, but we have a larger burden on the population today. I think it's a national conversation. How quickly can we find a basket of measures that show our empathy for the most vulnerable in our society?
But Dr. Kituyi, I want to go beyond theory. Let's talk practical matters.
I'm talking
here.
Practical things here now.
Where will you get the money from to alleviate the suffering of Kenyans? You've seen our debt burden. You know where I come from.
I will suspend any major infrastructural projects today to attend to the health pandemic and the vulnerable businesses that are declining before I come back to those major.
And yet you know there are penalties for that.
No.
Especially if you borrowed money for those projects.
Well, that's one challenge. But there's another thing. You just mentioned earlier today, we've just received COVID relief related soft loan from IMF. I will actually put that money into COVID-related vulnerabilities and national recovery strategy. I will not put any of that money into continuation of pre-existing projects that have nothing to do with the fragilities that we're suffering today because of COVID.
So if two weeks or so ago, if you are the man standing as the CEO of the country to speak to Kenyans about the state of the nation, the worrying infection rate, would you then have announced a lockdown? Would you have done the same thing? Because some are saying that lockdown seems to have helped when it comes to containing the virus. We're seeing the infection rate coming down. Would you have done the same thing?
Yes. I totally agree with President Kenyatta that this country needed a lockdown. But I would have gone further and taken lessons from the earlier lockdown. Were we locking down or were regulating the time of moving around? Because there was insufficient attention to other attendant actions and practices related to a lockdown. When you say we are going to close at a certain time, but then you don't have any problem with close proximity without protective gear like masks, and you are only focusing the time element of lockdown, that is not very sufficient. Similarly, the political class cannot talk at both ends of its mouth. We talk about lockdown and we do mass rallies. To me... And
we saw you at a few of them, Dr. Kituyi.
I was burying my uncle and I was forced to take it away from our homestead to spread it out at a school because of the first day of the lockdown. But I share the sense that we could have done better. Including have reduced the number of persons that physically attended that funeral of my uncle. But having said that, I will not in any way be talking about any mass mobilization activity until we have sufficient indications of a significant decline in infection rates in the country. I'll put more resources in testing, screening, tracing, as we're doing earlier on, and mitigating the individual costs that many vulnerable people are suffering because of having so many of the dear ones in hospital.
Earlier on, Dr. Kituyi, we talked a little bit about that petition. Over 200,000 Kenyans concerned about the IMF loan.
Yeah.
Per chance, let's talk about scenarios. What would happen if Kenya did not receive that loan?
Nothing dramatically different, except that
do we need it?
I think I don't know. You know, when Kenya was offered the first round of the debt service suspension initiative last year, 73 countries applied, Kenya declined. It came back to the table later to become country number 74. But it said we have no appetite for that initiative. Of course, it had reasons other than not having appetite for that. But my view is that if we did not take the soft loan from IMF, we'll have brought forward the visit to the fourth Eurobond offer on the commercial markets to raise money. We are in a catch-22 situation where you have debt that is maturing without productive capacity to service it. You are going to the commercial markets to borrow money in order to pay what is ripe for paying. And this is not a sustainable situation for a developing country. We have to have a conversation seriously about austerity that is necessary without punishing the most vulnerable, in a way of trimming down our expenditure to be closer to our production, not living way beyond our means, even if we dream about beautiful infrastructure programs.
Any chance, and this is something that one or two viewers are asking, that IMF would listen to an online petition? I'm sure it's highly unlikely, but what's your view as someone who served
I have been sitting in the annual spring meetings of IMF World Bank, which are going on right now in Washington. There is no scope for the citizen petition impacting that allocation. But IMF is responsive to, can we scrutinize that you spend this money on the sectors you promised to spend it on? The regional and country offices try to enforce that. So citizen pressure has its political benefit. I think it's important that government and all other players in this country and our friends notice that Kenyans are growing in the anxiety about the burden to be bequeathed to the vulnerable underemployed generation because of our living beyond our means today.
And I ask you this question because there are economists who opine that at the rate at which we are moving, we could be going back to the IMF in another 2, maybe 3 years, seeking similar support. Do you see that possibility? 2023, 2024, we might seek for greater support again if we don't change tack?
I mean, if there is a facility that helps us to retire expensive debt, not to service payment that is due, but to retire expensive commercial debt, I prefer that facility to the commercial non-reschedulable debt that we have been getting on the Eurobond market. So, but we can't go to the IMF in 3-4 years for a COVID mitigation facility. I hope by that time we're on top of this challenge.
Okay.
As a health hazard.
Okay, and I do want to switch gears, but let me ask you one more on this one. Debt, 1.2 trillion or so borrowed within the last 1 to 2 years alone. What should the next administration start at when it comes to tackling Kenya's public debt? What would be your recommendations, whether you're the one leading that or somebody else?
I think there has to be built-in mechanisms in our long-term governance that governments do not have the discretion to borrow as much as they are able to borrow. I think that judicious use of the possibility of going to credit markets has to be accompanied by 2 fundamental changes: reining in the ballooning recurrent expenditure, the overbloat civil service and political bureaucracy as one example. But importantly, let us cut our ambitions of infrastructure expansion according to the cloth at our disposal. Let us not overreach ourselves to create the optics of modern infrastructure while we are struggling to service even what we had borrowed before. I think it's important that a balancing act has to be brought forward.
That would be your recommendation?
That is my recommendation. But use the monies that we borrow to build productivity in sectors, in investments, in activities that create value and create employment.
Okay. And I do have some feedback that I want to quickly take right now. This is what a few Kenyans are saying before we switch gears. This is a topic I know we can't exhaust, the state of the economy, but a few tweets posted earlier today. Okay, first one. Dr. Ezekiel Mutua says, your sovereign power lies at the ballot box. Once you cast your vote, you can only exercise vigilance. But essentially, you donate your power to your representatives after voting. You can petition the IMF, but they don't sign contracts on social media. We are a peculiar lot indeed. Okay, that's one. Let's pull up another. Remember, I'll also take your SMSs on 22422, so keep them coming. Let's see what else we have here. Pull that up. Okay, it's taking some time to come on. But, okay, Devin D tweeted this earlier. He said, IMF's mandate is to maintain global financial stability. Its loans are essentially bailouts for creditors. That is lending to forestall default. The government of Kenya needs IMF credit enhancement for more Eurobond debt. It's in the market for a $1 billion and €1 billion Eurobond by June. Like I told you, debt treadmill. Okay, some thoughts from some opinion shapers on the state of the country's debt. Roy Gitahi says, I'm finding this hashtag, Stop Loaning Kenya hashtag, bold and foolish. Government rarely borrows without knowing where its funds will go. But government doesn't know where revenue will come from. People are mad at the government and are going for the money, not realizing government needs the money for service delivery. Okay? I think we have another one or two more. Frederick Okango says the job facing Kenyans is to determine which hearts and minds command qualities best suited to unify us, recover the economy, secure the next generation a legacy of choices based on informed awareness. Dr. Kituyi is that guy. Dr. Kituyi, you seem to have a fan there. Who's tweeted in. I think we read this one earlier. And maybe we take this one now. Kabando asked these questions. He wants to know your views on this, Mukhisa Kituyi. So maybe let's stop beating around the bush and tackle them right now. 1, looting of KEMSA. 2, BBI. 3, Uhuru Raila endorsement. And 4, your choice of political party. Kabando says once you clear these 4 points, you've got his vote. Where do we begin?
You inform Kabando that I've discussed those issues with him. That's
okay.
Where I begin. But for public interest, looting at KEMSA, I believe that all corruption in all public sectors is a crime against the country. And demonstrably visible progress has to be shown in investigation and prosecution of culprits in any act of corruption. So that is a principle I have across the board in all cases of fraudulent conduct by public officers entrusted particularly with public resources in a critical area like KEMSA.
Will you, and on the back of that, will you partner with anyone who has questions of corruption as you seek to be the next president of this country?
I want as many as the people who have been mentioned in these matters to clear their names, to be brought forward if those are culpable, to face the necessary logical consequences of the law, and other ones to exclude themselves from seeking public office if they are found to be culpable.
Your answer is very politically correct. I thought you would say something of the note that you will not go near anyone, for example, who has questions of corruption.
I'm told in this country you might be very, very much alone if you're walking away from everybody who has anything to be suspicious about.
So, but isn't that the problem, Dr. Kituyi? It sounds like you're almost willing to welcome anyone to your bandwagon if they'll bring votes. Doesn't matter their quote-unquote sins.
You would like me to say something like that, and I'm not saying that. I'm saying that all cases, whether KEMSA or not, should be subject to the proper and transparent, timely investigation and prosecution of culprits. I think they owe that to Kenyans. They don't just owe to my career, my political career. They owe to the citizens of this country.
Okay. We can talk a little bit about finding clean individuals in this country. BBI, your stand?
Stand about BBI?
Yes.
It's late in the day to be asking that again. I did mention that if I'd been here a year ago, there are so many things I'll have enumerated that I thought should not have been in this bill. But it's too late in the day to go into that. As of now, I support that to go ahead and finish that process. However, 2 things are important to me. BBI cannot compete with measures to keep out of harm's way on COVID. While I support that we go and finish with the referendum and get on with other business, I feel strongly we should not create conditions under which public awareness and public action to mitigate COVID is muffled because of the voice of promoting BBI.
What I struggle with, Dr. Kituyi, on that answer is that you're basically telling us you are not willing, or you feel it's too late to engage in a process that would effectively determine how you would lead this country if you were to become president. It sounds like you're sitting on the fence.
I'm not sitting on the fence. I'm saying I support BBI referendum to be completed, but I support the fight against COVID more than I support BBI. That's all I'm saying.
What about the challenges that you say you would have raised if you had time earlier will affect how you lead?
I will have liked something different. I will definitely not be supporting an exercise that is going to create more salaried positions when we have a bloated public bureaucracy. But I'm saying that is now water under the bridge.
You have the power to oppose it, Dr. Kituyi. You do. You have a following. Some would say, why not take a stand and say, on this basis, I have an issue.
I've reflected on this. I don't want to get into that kind of campaign at this stage. I'm saying those, as of now, it's not a killer issue that I now say, because of this increasing number of MPs and so on, let us oppose BBI. I'm saying let us go ahead with the referendum, vote yes, and get on with other business. But let's not present it as if it's competing for airtime with mitigation of the social consequences of COVID lockdown. And
you say you're not sitting on the fence on this matter. That is your view?
That is my view.
Okay, let's take the third one. Are you looking for an endorsement from the president, from ODM leader Raila Odinga?
No, I'm not. Sisi wengine wetu wanaharakati tunatafutana. We have a desire to bring back to the center of national politics policy content. We'll have to continue engaging and growing this constituency. And I hope in their wisdom, the president and his principal partner in the handshake will see that the direction and the future of Kenya requires an opportunity for policy-driven politics. If they assent to that, when they see that the population of Kenya is seeing value in policy-based politics, they are welcome to come on board. But I'm not sitting pretty waiting for someone to tap my shoulder and say, Kituyi Dosha.
Okay, I want to hold on there. Let's hold on point 4. I have some pictures that I want to show you. Let's take a look at some of the pictures of a meeting you were recently in as we are on this topic of endorsements. Let's put the first one up. We recently saw you in the presence of 3 other men, not just any men, men of note and stature in this country. And we're going to put the pictures up to allow our viewers just to reflect on that, because it caused quite a stir. Maybe I can be a bit more specific. It's taking some time to come up. We saw you in the presence of ODM leader Raila Odinga. Okay, there we go. And Dr. Kituyi, feel free to look at the screen. ODM leader Raila Odinga. We saw you there with Senator James Orengo and Governor Kivutha Kibwana. Lots of smiles. Before we look at these, let's hold on the other ones. The first ones are the ones I'm interested in. Lots of smiles there. Dr. Kituyi, what were you smiling about?
Okay, when I had a press conference at the Serena Hotel on the Sunday that I came back from Geneva, I announced all and sundry that 14th of February, that I am going to reach out to other political leaders, regardless of their persuasion, to encourage that we tone down the very toxic confrontational language that has characterized Kenya politics, because it's too early in the day for us to let the politics heat up until it disrupts economic activity for 15 months to an election. And that is a message that I've been taking to all and sundry. But also, truth be said, I am very interested in tracing back, where did it start training upon us? Remember, in the 1990s, the second liberation was about fulfilling certain hopes and expectations, building an infrastructure to create a nation that we can be proud of to hand to the next generation. When I come back and listen to the content of politics being, vote for me because I'm a good Robin Hood. Vote for me because I can assemble a number of
Robin Hood, you steal from the rich and give the poor.
Yeah, that we are disembedding policy from political competition. And I'll be very, very interested to see how many people can enrich a conversation that policy has to inform sound politics, that political persuasion, political discourse gives hope to the hopeless and shows empathy for the vulnerable, but also importantly addresses the concerns of Enterprise Kenya.
Okay.
So these are conversations I'm taking to persons who are ready to listen to me, and that includes leaders of political parties, competitors for political office.
So, and you've given us a very good overview, but first of all, did you call that meeting, or were you called for that meeting?
I called that meeting.
You're the one who
yes, I was the convener of the lunch at the Radisson Arboretum.
That's where those pictures are from?
Yes, that's from the Arboretum.
What was the agenda and was it achieved?
I invited all friends from our struggles for the second liberation in the 1990s to lunch while we talked about the issues that I've just mentioned.
Did the discussion of an alliance?
No. There was no discussion of alliance at that time.
So those pictures that circulated was just lunch and
No. There's a lot of things you can talk in Kenya politics without talking alliance. But it doesn't exclude the possibility that at an appropriate time, some of us will want to start talking alliance issues. If a faction of YK92 can talk about an alliance for change, why can't other people who are never in YK also start talking about alliance at the appropriate time? But it was not an agenda at that lunch.
Okay, and you've actually kind of hopped to my next question, which was going to be, so are we going to be seeing you meeting other groups? Are we going to see you meeting the president? Are we going to see you meeting the deputy president if you're on this mission to get people to buy into your vision?
On the issues of toning down toxic rhetoric in politics, I'm ready to meet everybody, anybody and everybody. On the issues of building a shared front because of policy content, I'll be very selective. But I'll continue exploring possibilities with like-minded persons, with a shared history and perception, and with engagement of younger politicians emerging who have to inherit the momentum of national renewal.
Okay, and I ask you these questions because I've actually just been sent a copy of one of the dailies that will be published tomorrow. I don't know if you've gotten a chance to look at it.
Yes, I can see the speculation of Standard.
Is this Raila's new alliance, the presence of ODM leader allies at a Nairobi hotel meeting? I believe that happened today, which brought together former UNCTAD boss Mukhisa Kituyi, governors, senior legislators, setting tongues wagging on whether a new political alliance is in the making. What's that about?
If me and any persons associated with me decide to create an alliance, we owe it to the Kenyan public that we come out publicly, openly, and announce it. Until and unless that has happened, I don't think I have very much to say about it.
You're not going to give us a hint. The whole nation is watching this interview, Dr. Kituyi. Surely you're not going to leave them.
Yes, I'm telling the Kenyan nation that the political space is going to be very interesting in the coming period. And many of us who want to be players in that space have to look at all different permutations. But most importantly, at this stage, we have to show fidelity to the vulnerability and the suffering of Kenyans in the wake of the lockdown.
Okay, my takeaway is at least it sounds like some alliance is brewing somewhere, but you don't sound like you want to get deeper into that.
You have a right to your opinion.
Okay.
That I can't take from you.
Yes, I do. And so do our viewers. And so we leave them to figure that one out. Okay, let's look at the last question there. Kabando still wants to know, what's your choice political party?
Kabando knows the name of my political party. It will be appropriately announced formally at a function once the lockdown is over, and I will invite you personally to be present during that function.
Myself as Wahiga?
Yes.
Okay, we will come as Citizen. I
will invite Citizen and you.
And myself.
Yes.
And I ask you this because in advanced democracies, and Kenya has come quite a long way, the political party in many ways gives an understanding of who this candidate is and what that candidate stands for. Right. As we speak this evening, some would ask, who is Mukhisa Kituyi? Because if we don't know what party he's going to run on, we can't really gauge who he is, because people use parties to read the intentions of a candidate. If you look at the Democrats and the Republicans in the States. So your mystery might work against you if you keep Kenyans waiting.
I think that's an interesting interpretation of political culture in certain democracies, where you are what party you join. But in Kenyan history, since 1997, there is no single party that has won 2 elections. So that character starts changing around individuals much more than individuals change around the party. We have not had a single party that has won 2 elections since 1997. So if there's a political culture, it is not molded by what political party you are joining. But you can understand, historically, I belong to a certain form of social democratic tradition where I believe in fiscal discipline, but also in this massive state responsibility to cushion the most vulnerable in society. So whichever party you will associate with me will have to be anchored around those values.
So as parties move around the country in the next coming months telling Kenyans, this is what we offer you, are you telling Kenyans, don't listen too critically?
No, I'll be doing that with a political party in that time frame.
But you say, again, political parties don't mean much here if after 2 terms.
Political parties in Kenya do not have a deep history because of the shifting sands of political party. But in the period of the contest, we can tell a political party's character by the policy it stands for, by the personnel it fronts, by the values it espouses.
What character of a political party would you then vie under?
Ditto, what I just described. I believe in fiscal discipline. I believe in the strong importance of enterprise as a driver of opportunity, but I believe in the responsibility of the developmental state to cushion the most vulnerable, to invest in sectors that uplift the largest majority of the population.
Where would you group that party? Social Democrat?
A social democratic party. A social democratic.
A social democratic party.
Yes.
Okay. And the name to be revealed at
an appropriate time.
Once the lockdown is over.
Yes.
In your words?
Most likely before the lockdown is over.
Most likely. Okay. Yeah. That sounds sooner rather than later.
Yes.
I hadn't warned my director about this, but when you came back to the country around about early February, you spoke. And one of the things you said is your next steps. We played that clip earlier on in the bulletin. I don't know if we still have it. And just to hear from you, because about 2 months or so have passed since you told Kenyans, from here, this is what's going to happen, and I'll be right back. And I want to understand what you've been up to and what your findings were. I don't know if we have that clip, and we will be putting that up on the screen briefly. Okay, I think we have it ready. This is Dr. Mukhisa Kituyi announcing that he was going to vie for the presidency of this country, but then telling Kenyans these would be his next set of steps. Let's listen in. Okay, I'm told not yet. Do we have it? Okay, it's a problem. Let me just get straight to the point. You declared your presidential ambitions, but then you told us you're going to Western Kenya to consult. Oh, we have it now. Okay, not too late to play it. Let's run it.
In my home area in Western Kenya, for the next few weeks, consult, seek advice, but also seek blessings. On the basis of this, I'll come back to the national stage, where I intend then to formally declare the start of a campaign to seek to be the 5th president of the Republic of Kenya.
What were your findings from that consultation?
I had a very, very, very fruitful and very enriching experience meeting leaders of different categories in Western Kenya, including all the governors of former Western Province and Trans Nzoia, including most of the members of parliament from the region. I did very, very significant tours into Busia County and significant meetings in Bungoma County, including a public lecture at Kibabe University, meeting with religious leaders and youth leaders, and getting to have a sense of what has been happening at the grassroots level while I've been out of the country. And as I mentioned, I will come back to the national stage after that trip and start consultation about the next phase of the program. That next phase included a number of select targeted trips out of Nairobi into the Mount Kenya region and at the coast of Kenya. But you see, the lockdown and suspension of public gatherings was imposed 4 days before I came back to Nairobi, which means that I've had to go back to both subterranean work, policy development work, consultations informally with the potential participants in our political engagement, reaching out to like-minded leaders in different political parties about what is our national interest. These are activities that I can do without breaching the protocols of the COVID pandemic-related restrictions. As soon as the COVID pandemic restrictions are over, you will see me roll out my activities as promised and as preparations continue right now.
Rallies, the works, we will see you out as per COVID-19 protocols.
Yes, and the necessary different steps of moving forward. They're all coming up.
Okay. Yeah. One of the things, and I don't know if you've discovered this, and of course you've been in politics for a long time. Let's know you've been away for some time, but I know you would keep coming in, and you've been a veteran politician. Ideology, Daktari, is not a very big deal in Kenyan politics, some would say. In fact, recently, as soon as you announced that you are vying for the presidency, your grassroots critics had a few choice words for you. They described you as aloof, elitist, so far removed from the common man that you don't even attend funerals. I'm sure you've heard those words. What's your response to that?
All right. Any person who doubted that I have a relationship with the grassroots was welcome to see what happened on Saturday, the 6th of March, during my homecoming. both in the kind of groups who are meeting on the way, but particularly the size of rally in a rural setup that I had on that afternoon. But be that as it may, I mean, democracy allows everybody an opinion. Even a person who thinks that to be a good person, I should have been flying in from Geneva to attend funerals in his village. He has that democratic right to say those kind of things. But also I have to be responsive to the reality that there will be some things I have not known. I have to engage. There are voters who are born since I left government. Now, people who were born when I was a minister in 2002 are going to be voters next election. So it is true that there are people out there that I have to reach out to. And it is in the interest of my competition to paint me in the devil incarnate. And I can understand that. My responsibility is to show that I'm...
So there are those who are hell-bent on painting you as the...
Of course.
That's
and
an
I can understand the reasons.
Devil incarnate.
Those whose assumptions of the competitive advantage are under threat will take desperate measures. And I can understand that totally. My challenge is, how can I, with humility, present myself not as an angel, but as a person who is struggling to understand the challenges and apply his best intentions, best competences with advice to dealing with those challenges. This is what I set out to do.
And so you're not going to fight fire with fire?
No, I don't think. I think I've outgrown that. There was a time, ask people who knew me as a parliamentarian, I had the capacity for repartee. But I don't think that is a characteristic I want to carry on my shoulders anymore. I leave it to the next generation. I want to offer a role in calming down, helping, reason together. Particularly, let us find a shared view. It is part of our political competition to address the challenges of those who are hurting because of this lockdown and the pandemic.
But linked to that, what do you then say, and on this note, to those who say that he's been, a good representative for Kenya abroad, he understands Kenya's issues and Kenya's policy challenges as well, but he's too sort of embroiled in theory. Practically on the ground, his method of operation would not work in the Kenyan political sphere.
But you see,
I'm sure that's a question you've gotten many times.
The business of campaign is to present your wares to the electorate. I will want to tell Kenyans that if I formed government and I created a Ministry of Services, which has never existed in Kenya, because of my belief in the potential and the capacity of services industry, and because of my belief in unlocking the power, the knowledge I've gained as 5 years member of the Broadband Commission of the United Nations, that I know where we have to go, what we can unlock, the potential of Kenyan net entrepreneurs. This is not theory. It might be theory to analog generation, but those young entrepreneurs out there, men and women, who have these ideas about developing apps, about the investments in logistics, about outsourcing certain capacities of services globally, they will see that the rubber hits the road in bringing home best practice from around the world. It's not all abstract and theory. Sometimes when you don't understand something, the way to dismiss it is to call it theory.
For you, it's very practical.
I know theory and I know practice, and I'm very, very clear about things we need to do as a country to gain new levers for creating hope for the increasingly hopeless young unemployed Kenyans.
Doctor, I want you to hold that thought. We actually at a point when we should have been wrapping up this interview, but I've got questions for you. And so what we're going to do from our viewers, it's going to take a short time. So let's take that break quickly, come back, run through some of your questions. I'm seeing lots of them. I know 22422 is the SMS line. Hashtag is Newsnight. I'll pose them to Daktari on the other side of this break, even as we continue to interrogate Dr. Mukhisa Kituyi. You're watching Newsnight. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Thanks for patiently waiting. We will let you go to sleep shortly, but first let's take a few of your messages. It's not fair that you sent in so much feedback and we don't give Dr. Kituyi a chance to read respond to a few of those tweets and SMSs as well. Let's start with the tweets. I'll take the first one now. Isaac Sontedi says, ask Dr. Kituyi what's his view on the bottom-up approach economic model. Let's start there, Dr. Kituyi.
All right, thank you. I remember the former Prime Minister of Thailand, Thaksin Shinawatra, giving us an example of how Thailand recovered from the Asian recession of 1997. And he has this model. When a tree is wilting, you apply water to the roots
first,
and then it will create conditions for the flowers and the leaves to recover. It's important, particularly in terms of trying to turn around an economy after crisis like we're going through right now, that resourcing be generously availed at the grassroots level. We had an example of that under Mwai Kibaki when we came into government in 2002. The dairy industry, the coffee industry, the crisis they were suffering was the absence of credit and bad debt at the grassroots level. When government bought KICC from the people who had grabbed it and put it back at the disposal of farmers with a credit line to revive dairy production, it gives the producers money. The mwananchi has no culture of saving. The money that arrives spurs consumption, which now avails credit that can be trapped by the commercial investor, the entrepreneur. So in some areas, reviving an economy that is on its knees requires resourcing at the production level, small-scale producers, and it unleashes the possibilities of the entrepreneur to turn that into consumer-driven economic recovery.
Okay.
So I believe in that as one, but it's not the only one. You must have different approaches to this.
Okay, well, hold on that. Let me take another one here. Fred Osiro wants to know this from you, Dr. Kituyi. As a fresh candidate for 2022, what are your priorities for a new Kenya? Let me rephrase this because I've asked previous guests on the show this question. First 100 days in office for you. Should Kenyans agree with your proposal for you to become the next CEO, what would you do differently?
On the first day after being sworn in, I will announce the reconstitution of the National Social and Economic Council. Because I believe however good intention a president or a government is, if you're moving without a sufficiently resourced and resourceful economic council for a developing country, you are sailing without a compass. And I think it is critical for the Kibaki period. It is critical for our recovering and resurgent Kenya. The second thing that I'll do, I will establish for the first time in the history of Kenya a ministry for services. I've mentioned to you how Kenya is gifted in services, but we don't give it the necessary institutional support that it requires. If we just took some of the resources we have been putting into agriculture and put it into services, the turnaround in job creation, in our capacity to export services, industrialized services, will be phenomenal and will be a major boost for economic recovery. Number three, I'll link vulnerability to obligations of servicing the higher education loan board loans for university graduates. It's unconscionable to have persons who are struggling to pin down a first job, forced to pay money that they borrowed to get an education, without the society availing with an opportunity to use that education to earn that money. So I will have a very purposeful effort in that direction. Number four.
And finally, because in the interest of time.
Okay, finally. I'll convene a serious retreat with all the governors and cabinet. Because if you want to drive a developmental state, the governors respectfully have to read from the same page as the central government. You cannot do affirmative action to turn around Kenyan agriculture when agriculture is devolved without engagement with governors. So I'll cultivate a spirit of engagement, mutual respect, and try to lock our steps with devolved government for areas like agriculture, which will need massive, targeted, intelligent subsidies to turn it around and unlock its potential.
Okay, we'll interrogate some of those further when you launch your new party. Kelvin Wanyeki says, please ask Dr. Kituyi how he intends to deal with corruption. We are sick of it. Go schools, KEMSA, NYS scandals. Also, ask him how he's going to revolutionize the judicial system. And if I can add this, Dr. Kituyi, because you sound like someone who's willing to join forces with anyone of sort of like mind, would you then be willing to fight corruption amongst those closest to you? Because Kenyans are concerned that corruption is highest in the political class, and you are now in the thick of it.
I have thought very seriously about the challenge of corruption to Kenya. I have a burning ambition to remove this scourge, this shame, from the global public identity of Kenya as among the top 20 most corrupt countries in the world. I cannot allow myself to be crippled by obsession with forensic corruption. That spend all my time looking at what corruption was done in the past. I will try to encourage the judicial system and executive appointees to expedite speedy completion of ongoing corruption cases.
But you will not follow past injustices? Those
I will not obsess with the forensic corruption work.
Even though,
I will, but no.
Even though
I'm not saying I'll give them a blank check. That's a different thing. I think Kenya has to demonstrate that corruption does not pay. The way to do it is to punish corruption. Raise the cost of being caught for being involved in corruption. That has worked elsewhere. And a number of serious specific measures that I will take. The first one, for example, I will establish a program which is done in a few countries. You let out to private investigative agencies to follow stolen money offshore, and you negotiate a percentage that is paid to the forensic auditors who are looking at what of our resources are kept abroad. Of course, we know that because of the digital revolution, it is possible to electronically trace some of that money fairly easily. We have seen some of that.
This is something you're willing to do even if it touches on coalition partners, supporters? I mean, the president himself has said in previous interviews, his family, if there are questions, are you willing to say the same thing and follow through on it?
I will let my son go on trial if he's involved in theft of public resources. And I've made that known to my immediate family. And it's something I take seriously. I will not be vindictive, but I will make it clear that I abhor the shame that corruption brings to our country, and understand the pain of those whom we are hurting because we're stealing their medicines, we're stealing their education. I listened to you announcing on news today that necessary diligence had been done to make sure that exams are done properly. Okay, on exam day, but structural injustice is done when half of the students had no access to online learning in preparation for those exams. Already your poverty at home is impacting how you're prepared for that exam, however even the invigilation was. And this part of this is that we cannot afford them services because of corruption. I don't think I deserve to be treated seriously as a candidate for leadership of this country if my word is not honorable on how much I can make crime of corruption stigmatized and punished in our country.
Dr. Kituyi, I only have two more questions for you coming in on SMS. One here comes from Akaka Kenda, who says, Dr. Kituyi, up there on theory, but he feels you're weak on practice. Nzoia and Webuye Industries went down when he was the Minister for Industry. How come?
Oh, that is not practice. He should understand, when I was Minister of Agriculture, the Minister of Trade, I negotiated the free trade area quantitative limit on duty-free importation of sugar to Kenya. The only inhibition to flooding Kenya market legitimately with sugar from our neighboring countries that has been used up to now. That was my achievement. It was not theory, it was practice. Pan-African paper mills went to intensive care the moment President Moi subdivided the nuclear estate and gave to politically correct individuals as land, and for the poor as settlement schemes. You cannot build a sustainable pulp industry when in the middle of production you take away the main source of pulp, subdivide it and give to individuals. That had nothing to do with Kituyi as minister. And that was a death that was already underway by the time we came into government.
Webuye also.
That is Webuye.
That is Webuye. Pan paper. Yes.
Yeah, Pan paper died because Moi gave away the nuclear estate.
Okay. That's your response to that. As we wrap this up, Mike Embu, and this might seem off topic, but he wants to know where your musical talent went to. He says you mesmerized people with songs mocking political parties during campaign rallies. Might we see some of that?
The next generation can inherit that talent. As I embrace wisdom, the knowledge and the creativity, actually, I have not mentioned this. One of the drivers of New Kenya is going to be public investment in the creative industry. Film, music, and dance are part of the agenda of a New Kenya. And I would like to see some people audition with that through political compositions, the way I did 20, 30 years ago.
Okay. I was going to ask you this earlier, but have you been vaccinated by any chance?
Yes. Actually, I was one of the earlier ones to take the first vaccine at a time when people are starting to spread too much gossip that the vaccine might be bad because of these. You know, everybody who is on Facebook thinks they have become professionals on immunology, and they tell us all manner of things, trying to drive attention away from the critical importance that we must get as many Kenyans as possible vaccinated against this monster.
Dr. Kituyi, we'll take that as your final word. Thank you for your time. There are more questions, but we have to leave it there. We need to let people go to sleep. They have to go to work tomorrow, and you need to go and rest, I'm sure, as well. So that's where we're going to wrap it up. Thank you so much to everyone who sent in their feedback. Thank you, Dr. Kituyi, for being our guest this evening. Our SMS line, it's been 22422. And the hashtag NEWSNIGHT. We can't go through all the messages, but thank you. We'll keep engaging online on this discussion. We leave it here on behalf of the whole team that's made this broadcast possible. And of course, our sign language interpreter tonight has been Njoki Shege. Thank you so much for tuning in. Remember, every Tuesday we call leaders, future leaders, past leaders, current leaders to come, and we ask them your questions to see what their views are on the state of the nation and what they are doing for those who are in positions of responsibility. We do this again next week, Tuesday on NEWSNIGHT. So please tune in. My name is Wahiga Mwaura. Have a good night. Stay safe as best as you can. We'll see you soon.